All right, as you just saw there, the PM's in San Diego. The big AUKUS announcement expected tomorrow. More details over this afternoon. Joining me to cover them off and more, Dennis Shanahan, National Editor at The Australian. Dennis, we're on the eve of the big announcement. This is the PM's first visit to the United States. Already the AUKUS sub deal has spanned two governments, but I reckon there'll be dozens more before we get one of these boats in the water. This afternoon, details on some of the money. $200 billion, we're told, 0.1% of GDP. You and I both know defence. If it's $200 billion now, you can be absolutely sure it won't be $200 billion when we see a sub in the water, will it?
I think that we can be safe that buying the nuclear submarines is a bit like buying a house in Italy. It's going to end up costing you at least double of what you thought it was going to cost. I think that what we're going to see here, the history of all of these big projects has been that they have spiralled in cost. And how could anyone actually put a final figure on something that is 30 years out with a new submarine as part of it? It just doesn't stack up, and the numbers involved, look, this may be, a particular amount for the submarine, but given that all of the other commitments that are being made on defence, what we're actually looking at is rising the level of GDP for national defence spending from 2 to about 3%, or at least 2.5%. These are huge numbers, and yet the Albanese government hasn't shown any way it intends to be able to pay for this in the next 3 years or the next 15 years. So I think that cost is going to be huge, and we shouldn't allow ourselves to be misled by the fact that, it's going to create 20,000 jobs. This decision should be solely about national security. And in the past, we have seen major defence decisions, security and strategic decisions corrupted by local parochial politics and trying to work out if we can get enough jobs in Adelaide. Well, if you're going to get 20,000 jobs out of 200 billion at least, I wouldn't mind one of those jobs, because I think that works out quite a bit per job.
Couldn't have said the stuff about Adelaide better than you just did, Dennis. I mean, I think that has been the problem all the way along. It was one of the things that hampered that Japanese buy. They've got a permanent shipbuilding production line. We could have basically almost had those subs then. We went with that crazy hybrid out of the French system. Thank God the Turnbull sub's been snookered or blown up or whatever you do to an old sub. So hopefully this one will work, but the money absolutely is real. Just quickly, I've got other things I want to go to, but there was some concern with this bank that collapsed, the Silicon Valley Bank, on Friday. It's the biggest collapse we've seen of a bank since the GFC in 2008. It has been the go-to bank for the tech industry. Ramifications here in Australia, potential for a contagion effect. We seem at this stage to be okay, don't we?
Well, yes, and there may be some advantages within the tech industry where we could pick up American people who may be losing their jobs. We can pick up some workers. But I think there is the danger of a wider contagion to the US economy, and also to the wisdom of the Federal Reserve Bank in the US, whether it decides to continue to push up interest rates. That will be the big test here, not so much the impact on the tech industry itself. This could have worldwide global economic contagion, which will mean that the global growth slows. And so I think there is the danger of a much wider economic impact here. And while they are cauterising it, trying to keep it to one or two banks and allowing people to put their funds at face value, their bonds, into the central bank, that might save us from one or two banks, but there is the wider economic repercussions.
Well, let's go to the New South Wales Liberal launch. It officially occurred yesterday in Western Sydney. Their tentpole policy is this idea of a future fund for New South Wales children. Now, basically, it's a dedicated savings fund. It is not means tested. It'll apply to every child in New South Wales. It can be used for a manner of things when they turn 18, education costs, let's say, tools for a tradie, home deposit. But It requires parents to put money in before the government will match it, and it'll cost over $800 million. Now, put aside my reservations here that this isn't really Liberal policy. It's a long way off for voters. I mean, it'll be 18 years before any of the money in these funds materialise. But what do you make of it in terms of voter appeal, Dennis?
Oh, look, anything to do with helping people buy a home is popular. And I think that one of the unfortunate things for Scott Morrison in the last federal election was that when he put up the proposal to use super funds to be able to buy a house, it was too late in the election campaign. And I think that had he done it earlier and set up a real fight about it, he would have actually gone closer to winning the election. So yes, it is popular. Yes, it's a long way off, but people understand that. I think that, yes, it's not a very Liberal policy, but I think it will have, it'll have popular appeal, but it's probably come a bit too late in the campaign and is a bit too far off.
I 100% agree with your Morrison analysis there. If they'd perhaps campaigned on it for 6 months, it would have cut through, and I think it would have been very telling last year. Let's stay, though, in New South Wales. The interesting report I picked up in the Australian Financial Review today. Labor is outspending the Liberals 2-1 on online campaigning. We're into the final fortnight today, obviously. And behind Labor, the next biggest spender is Climate 200. Now, they have doubled the online spending of the Liberals. I'm interested for your take. The Teals were a spent force in the Victorian state election in November. They couldn't replicate, I think perhaps because of the fundraising rules in Victoria, the hit that they had in the federal election in May. How do you see things in New South Wales? And what do you make of the fact that there isn't, it seems, a Liberal push into online campaigning, which I have thought would be fundamental?
Well, I think that the fact that Labor is spending more money and the Teals are spending more money is indicative of the fact that Labor is probably better organised than the New South Wales Liberals, that they have more money to spend, as do the Teals, and they are more desperate to win. It is also an indication that they see the weakness of the Labor attempt to get into government, the fact of the low recognition level for Chris Minns, and so that's where they're spending it. I don't think the Teals will be have as much influence at the state level in New South Wales as they did at a federal level. I think that the idea of climate change is seen much more as a national federal issue, and that helped particularly in Victoria for the Teals. I just suspect that, like Victoria, the Teals will have trouble getting enough traction on climate change to actually make a big difference in New South Wales.
Dennis, I just want to pick up too, Chris Minns, in the same story in the Financial Review, he is prolific at using WeChat. Now, this is a Chinese messaging service, but it underscores, doesn't it, that the power of the Chinese-speaking vote in our elections, and I know that in places in Victoria, let's say, it really moved for the Labor Party at the last federal election with criticisms or sense that the Morrison government didn't like China. This is perhaps, I think, going to be campaigning of the future.
Oh, I think that's right. There is no doubt that the Chinese vote, people of Chinese descent or Chinese heritage, they didn't like the federal government's attitude towards China. There's a lot of propaganda on some of these websites, which turns voters against governments, and I think Chris Minns can see the danger there. This is particularly the case in some areas in Western Sydney and other areas, and so I think that the use of WeChat is a smart move by Chris Minns, and it is something that we'll see more of in the future.
Yeah, I don't like the segmenting of the Australian voting base in that respect into language groups, but that's where we're headed. Dennis, thank you. Thank you for your time.